If you haven't seen my videos on the Spyro series yet, then I would suggest you go catch up on those right now. I'll be covering some of the things discussed in those two videos, and to prevent making this any longer than it has to be, I don't want to explain the same thing again and again. Just click the link on screen or in the description if you want to. So anyways, here it is, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. The game widely regarded as the second best in the Spyro trilogy by the majority of the community. Now, I for one really adore this installment in the series, and years ago I found it to be the best in the whole original trilogy. That being said, just how well does it hold up today? Is it even worth your time? Well, our story begins directly after the events of Spyro 1, with Sparks and Spyro planning to go on a vacation together. So the two hop through a portal to Dragon Shores, but end up in the land of Avalar. See, a professor, a cheetah named Hunter, and a fawn named Allura had accidentally summoned an evil sorcerer named Ripto, who quickly conquered Avalar. And to fix this problem, they were going to summon a dragon to aid them. Spyro, being a dragon, seemed to fit the bill, and after a short encounter with Ripto, the adventure begins. Spyro is tasked with helping the citizens of Avalar who have been getting terrorized by Ripto's magic and gathering the talismans of the various realms to defeat Ripto himself. With the addition of more cutscenes and dialogue, the story feels generally grander when compared to Spyro 1. There's more depth with characters and with establishing the world of Avalar. What I love most about the plot is how much these new characters are developed. Take Ripto for example. He may just be my favorite villain of this era, as he truly feels villainous, something that nasty Norik severely lacked. Throughout the adventure, you get to see these cutscenes of Ripto being generally evil to everyone around him, even to his cronies Gulp and Crush. He doesn't even seem to care when they get defeated by Spyro because of how vain and arrogant he is. Ripto is the perfect embodiment of what a villain should be doing throughout a game. You don't just see him once and that's it, but you get to feel his looming presence, committing vile deeds and constantly wanting to murder everyone. Then there are Spyro's allies, which are also pretty dynamic. They don't feel like flat pieces of cardboard that just spout out tutorials. Rather, they feel kind of lifelike, and you can truly feel the strong desire in each of them to rid the world of Ripto, especially with Allura. But then there's my favorite character of the bunch, Moneybags, who genuinely feels like a greedy person who is taking advantage of Spyro. Combined with his lovable accent and strange magical abilities, at first I thought he was the villain, tricking Spyro into giving him all these gems to eventually thwart him. Fortunately, I was wrong, and he turns out to be just a selfish individual who always ends up falling flat on his face. What really makes these characters special though is the phenomenal voice acting and writing. Spyro is now voiced by Tom Kenny, which is a huge step up from the last game. There's something about how Tom Kenny puts a lot of emotion into his lines that make me adore Spyro's character even more.
Hi, I'm Spyro. What are you, some kind of goat?
Sure, he's still a snotty brat, but at least he sounds a bit more mature. This is what I consider to be the definitive Spyro, along with his voice and personality. Tom Kenny perfectly encapsulates Spyro in my opinion, and the rest of the character's voice work is pretty swell. Ripto sounds like a diabolical villain, Moneybags sounds like a greedy Russian, and Hunter sounds like a goofy but lovable source of comic relief. These characters and their light-hearted dialogue cause the story to be playful and somewhat endearing. There's a lot of charm to every character you meet along the way, which also have full voice acting. It seems like Insomniac went all out for this project, and it really shows. The world here feels like a real world, filled with an economy and a political structure. There are rats that mine for gems, and you actually get to see wars between the different races going on, and eventually bring peace to those realms. It really feels like you're helping these people, which only adds to the immersion. I've said it once and I'll say it again, Insomniac really knows how to build delightful atmospheric worlds that are interconnected and lively. But I think this has to be the best world in all of the Spyro games. The Dragon Realms and the Forgotten Realms, which I'll get to in the next review, have their merits, but I feel Avalar is the pinnacle of what Insomniac did for the Spyro series. Not to mention, Avalar looks visually stunning. This is obviously obviously a little more appealing than Spyro 1's presentation, as it is a bit more colorful. The texture work is also a bit more fine-tuned. When you compare the two games side by side, Spyro 2 looks the slightest bit better. And like the last game, I still love the art style with its blend of numerous colors and charm. There's a lot of personality in the presentation, from the way enemies interact with you to how expansive each level is. The overworlds in particular are massive when compared to the ones in Spyro 1. There's a much greater emphasis on three-dimensional movement here. There will be larger gaps you need to cross, areas that are in holes, and buildings you need to climb up to get some gems. For example, in Summer Forest, there's this large gap you can easily glide over, but when you look down and see an entirely new area, you feel obliged to explore whatever's down there. This adds a lot of depth to the world and exploration. You aren't just moving on a virtually empty plane like before in the overworlds, but instead there are now raised areas you can access, pools of water housing gems, and so much more. Not only that, but now all the overworlds don't contain enemies, which you could perceive as a bad thing, but I kind of like this feature, or lack thereof. It sort of gives Spyro a safe place to get a hold of his bearings, and for you, the player, to experiment with Spyro's moveset. In addition to this larger scale, the levels and overworlds are once again really varied in their graphical styles. You never truly know what theme you'll encounter when you enter an archway. It could be something as simple as a beach where you lead baby turtles to safety, or an active volcano where fawns are trying to close them. There's a lot of diversity to the level styles and design, much more when you compare it to Spyro 1. Even the music carries over this theme of making everything bigger. The soundtrack is one of my favorites out of all the Spyro games. I especially love the theme for Summer Forest, as it sounds so tranquil and soothing. Plus, each theme is a lot more varied than the last game, where some might be really upbeat, others will be hectic, and others will sort of be sad or peaceful. Every song just feels more memorable. If you played me any song from this game, I guarantee you I could identify it in a heartbeat. Perhaps this is just something to do with nostalgia, but I could never do that with Spyro 1's soundtrack. Stuart Copeland once again proves that he's a brilliant composer who uses a wide array of instruments to create a compelling score. Another thing worth talking about is the sound design, as it has improved significantly in the way of audio balancing since the last game. I can also understand what all the voice actors are saying, but even when I want to skip their dialogue, I can and just read the text box. The addition of dialogue boxes is an excellent choice. On a more personal note, these dialogue boxes give you, the viewer, some insight to what's going on with the plot, which is something the last game lacked. It makes it easier for me as an editor to have some lines of text I can show you to illustrate some plot points. Like the quirky dialogue, which is back in full swing if you couldn't tell. But one of the greater elements to this presentation is the new map feature. While I don't find mini-maps to be that useful, I still find that having this map is wonderful for a number of things. Now, you can never really get lost in the larger worlds. I mean, it is pretty hard to get lost in Spyro 2, as you can always just exit out of a level at will, but regardless, I like the inclusion of the map. It doesn't appear in future installments, and you have to open the pause menu to turn it on, so I guess the majority of people didn't really use it that much. I feel like that has a lot to do with the fact that Spyro 2's levels are geniusly constructed. What I mean by that is that the levels are not necessarily linear, but the branching pathways are obvious enough to where 100%ing this game doesn't feel like a chore. Some pathways are still well hidden, but I never found myself looking up a guide to find that last gem or orb. And even if I did have trouble, there's always the gem finder where you hold the back triggers and sparks will direct you to the last gems. I myself never really use this feature, but it's there for those who might have trouble exploring. Aside from this new gem finder with sparks, Spyro's moveset is practically the same in this game as it is in Spyro 1. The only notable new addition is that Spyro can hover by pressing the triangle button after a glide. This allows Spyro to gain some distance when platforming and also allows the developers to add larger gaps to hide other passageways and secrets. It's amazing how such a small tweak to Spyro's moveset can influence such large changes to the level design. Each level now feels a lot bigger and more open-ended. But that being said, it's not a game changer. Spyro 2 is still a collectathon where you gather gems and such, however the way you progress is a lot different. Before, all you had to do in Spyro 1 1 was collect gems, free dragons, and occasionally collect dragon eggs to show the balloonist to get to the other worlds. Like I said in my last review, this gave you an incentive to explore. In Spyro 2, Insomniac totally did away with that design philosophy, and instead constructed the game around collecting these talismans. In other words, all you mainly have to do to beat Spyro 2 is to get to the end of a stage and acquire the talisman of that realm. That's how you get to the boss of each homeworld that leads you to the next homeworld anyways. Sure, this makes the game a bit easier and more streamlined to play for the more casual type, but it also inadvertently discourages you from collecting everything and exploring everything. The gems are now virtually worthless, as the only value they have is being used by moneybags to clear roadblocks and learn new things. Now, moneybags and I sort of have a love-hate relationship. I love Moneybags' character and voice work, but I strongly dislike his concept. He exists solely to fill the void left by the balloonist, encouraging you to collect gems. And I kind of see Moneybags' implementation here to be lazy. It's almost like Insomniac was running out of ideas to make the gems have any value, you know, to preserve that gem nostalgia from the first game, and thought that a bear being a roadblock would be a great way to once again encourage exploration. The problem is that Moneybags doesn't really encourage all that much exploration. I got through the whole game on my first playthrough, casually picking up gems when it was convenient and not going out of my way to explore every nook and cranny. I just didn't see the purpose to exploring and going for 100% completion originally. What I find to be the most annoying thing about Moneybags is that he teaches a lot of Spyro's new abilities for a price. You can learn to swim, climb up walls, and head bash objects for gems. Now that sounds cool and all, and these abilities spice up the gameplay every now and again, but sometimes areas can't be accessed unless you have these abilities. This might not sound like a big issue to you, but it puts a huge damper on exploration the first time around. In Spyro 1, you could fully complete a level on your first go. Then in Spyro 2, in some realms like Glimmer, you need to learn to climb before you're able to do so. Sure, it adds replayability to each level, but it's just annoying to me. It's just a personal preference of mine to be able to collect everything in a level the first time through. Replayability should be added by smart level design that challenges you to explore everything, not by adding some ladder that you need to pay gems to a Russian bear to access. Usually a lot of levels don't contain these aspects, so you can complete them on your first visit, but when they do, it just seems more like a hassle than a smart replayability addition. The other thing I have mixed opinions on are the secondary missions inside every realm. They can range from something as simple as a light puzzle to something as frustrating as a hockey game to 5, where the ice controls are almost unbearable. The way Spyro controls on ice, especially when you need to change your perspective around a lot, is unintuitive, and based on my experiences, the ice control in Spyro 2 has to be the worst method of controlling ever. These hockey minigames have to be the worst of the bunch. But other than that, most of the secondary missions are just fetch quests, small puzzles, or something else really simple. They don't take much time to figure out and only yield these orbs as a reward. You need a certain amount of these orbs to reach later levels, but other than that, they feel somewhat pointless. You don't need all these orbs to beat the game, so you only need to do a select few missions. If I do have to compliment these missions on anything, I would say they add a bit of variety to the formula. I guess it's a nice break from running around, collecting gems, and killing enemies. And while not a lot of these secondary missions really held my interest, some missions were entertaining, like Hunter's Manta Ray in Aquaria Towers, or how some missions utilize the returning and new power-ups in interesting ways. But those are only a few out of the 64 secondary missions in Spyro 2, and unfortunately not a lot of them are fun to go through. It would be alright if they felt rewarding, but in the beginning of the game when the orbs have almost no value, nothing encourages you to do these missions. See, that's the reoccurring issue I have with Ripto's Rage. It lacks the incentive to explore and to 100% the game. Maybe that's not what the developers were going for in this title, but in Spyro 1, it felt rewarding to go out of your way to collect things. You could argue the inclusion of moneybags incentivizes you to collect gems, and the talismans are a great reward for completing a stage, but collecting objects didn't give me the same satisfaction as it did in Spyro 1. That doesn't mean the game is bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I just prefer the original over this one. The level design design is more varied and polished in Ripto's Rage, but in Spyro 1, progression was much simpler and non-linear. The beginning of Ripto's Rage, where talismen are required to reach each boss, gave me a feeling of linearity I wasn't a big fan of. Keep in mind, this is all subjective, this is just my preference, but I feel it was worth pointing out now so you know which of the two I like more. Nevertheless, after gathering a certain number of talismans in a world, you can confront either Gulp or Crush, Ripto's minions. Although these bosses aren't really challenging, they're at least more interesting than any boss from the last game. These fights are enjoyable and possess a mixture of originality and personality. But with all that out of the way, what about the ending? Well, I want to stress this spoiler warning above any other spoiler warning I have ever given. If you plan on playing Spyro 2, please skip ahead to the time on screen now. I'm actually serious, I really don't want to spoil the final boss and ending because, well, spoiler alert, they're fantastic. Anyways, Spyro collects all the orbs and enters Ripto's arena, where he's met by the little guy dinosaur himself. This boss fight has a couple of stages and all require you to use the power-ups. At some points you'll have to fly through the air to catch him on his pterodactyl, and other times you'll have to use the supercharge to bash a mechanical gulp. It's fast-paced and it's flashy. Not to mention, Ripto is constantly changing forms, making this boss fight feel exhilarating. It's the perfect way to end a tale of a sorcerer terrorizing all of Avalar. When you land that final blow on Ripto when he's sent plummeting to his doom, it feels so satisfying. This villain that has taunted you, insulted you, spat upon your dragon kind, and threatened murder many times finally met his end, at your hands. Ripto, in my eyes, is probably the best boss in all of the Spyro series, so it's only fitting that he should also have one of the most unique and entertaining fights in the series as well. So after Ripto burns to death, presumably, you're greeted with a little scene of Hunter beating up moneybags and Spyro finally going on his vacation. It gives closure to this journey, and I quite like the ending. Not to mention, there's a fair amount of things to do once you've completed the game. For one, if you've collected all the gems, you can permanently possess the Super Flame power-up, which is a neat reward, but it's kind of pointless since there's not really much else to do once you've collected and seen everything. But the Super Flame is not even the best part about the endgame content. There's actually another level called Dragon Shores. It's basically a whole homeworld devoted to having somewhat fun minigames and a theater to view all the cutscenes. You don't even have to fully complete the game to get here. All you need are 8,000 gems and 55 orbs, which isn't all that much. It's a great distraction if you're ever bored to blow some time on, and I consider the whole package of Dragon Shores to be somewhat more entertaining than the one-note Nasty's loot. Both are rewarding, but Dragon Shores gives you more bang for your completionist buck. So overall, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage is a fantastic game. Objectively speaking, it does so much better than the original. It has better and more complex level design and an overall more unique story with quirky dynamic characters. It embodies what every sequel should strive to be, and improves on everything the last game fell short on too. Plus, the game controls a lot better and adds some new abilities to Spyro's arsenal, along with a somewhat more responsive camera. Still, I prefer playing Spyro 1 over Ripto's Rage because of how simple it is to pick up and have a good time with. I like Ripto's Rage, but if I were stuck on a deserted island with the choice of having either of the two, I would pick the original. However, I would still recommend you check this title out, as I think anyone can enjoy it. Ripto's Rage is certainly more streamlined and easier to finish, but for me it just lacks that feeling of exploration and immersion. But as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. I know this isn't the most popular opinion of the game, so I'm interested to hear your opinions on my opinions. And thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye. Oh, and there will be a review of Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, so stay tuned for that.
You're going to have to go to Avalar's worlds and convince the inhabitants to give you their talisman. You can keep them in your guidebook.
Torch Ripto! Torch Ripto!
Keep track of your running shoes. Keep track of your running shoes. Talisman. Talisman. If you come across any orbs,